On this show, we've been reporting on and keeping up with the protests by Dutch farmers seeking to protect their industry from the depredations of their own government. The Netherlands are known as the little country that feeds the world, second only to the United States of America when it comes to food exports. I find that a fact hard to take in every time I read it. And yet farmers there are fighting tooth and nail to stop their government forcing through drastic reductions to the amount of farmland and the size of herds of livestock. Joining me now for an update on the situation is Ralph Schoellhammer, lecturer at Webster Vienna Private University. Hello there, Ralph. Thanks for joining me.
It's great to be with you again, Neil.
Yes, great stuff. And now this protest by the Dutch farmers, it doesn't get the international attention that I think it deserves. What is the latest news? How is that situation developed?
I think there are two main points that we have to keep in mind. One is, if we look at the most recent polls, the farmer citizen movement, which is kind of the political arm of the Dutch farmers, will do better than expected in the upcoming elections. So they have one seat at the moment. It's going to go up to 16 or 18 seats. But I think we also have to be critical in one respect. I think, as you mentioned just right, it was not covered that much outside media like GBNews and others. And I think one problem that the Dutch farmers have is, I think they could have and they should have connected their issue to a broader one, which is that in the Western world, we are increasingly at war with everything that makes modern life possible, right? It's farmers in the Netherlands, it's cows in Ireland, it's mining in Great Britain, it's nuclear power in Germany. This is part of a bigger picture where, kind of under the guise of the climate movement and the green movement, pretty much everything that makes modern life possible is under attack. But instead of trying to fight back as a unified front, we are split up in these smaller battle groups that never unify to take on the broader ideological issue that I believe would have significant appeal all over the West. Outside the Dutch areas, I think this would be something that people are very sensitive to all over the West if we could find a way to frame it in exactly this kind of way.
And is anything being done to try and correct that shortfall that you're describing, that lack of joined up action and joined up protest? Are the feelers out to create that international network?
Not yet. And the problem is, and this was something I think both you and I were afraid of course, what now was happening was that a lot in the mainstream media and competing political parties, right, they were looking at the most fringe elements of these movements. And of course, then they use them, they draw most of attention to these fringe elements and say, see, they're all radicals. They're actually quote unquote bad people. They're morally bad people. And if you do not have an effective way to fight back, at least for some middle of the road voters, that sticks. And then they might sympathize with your issues, but then in the voting booth, they say, well, they might be too radical after all. So this is always the uphill fight these new movements have to overcome. I mean, we saw Giorgia Meloni, in Italy, we see that politicians can do this, right? If they do it right, they can actually be rewarded at the voting booth after they have been in power. So I think this is the uphill battle that these new movements, to which I would count the Dutch farming movement and the citizens farmers movement, that they need to try to get to.
I described in my introduction that the Netherlands is the little country that feeds the world, and presumably that is the way in which the Dutch population see themselves as people who are farmers. That must be part of the national psyche. How are the general population reacting to the government's endeavours to cut this all back? To undo that identity.
Well, it's because it's the way it is framed, right? I feel that the government or those who want to take away those farms, they frame it a little bit better than those on the other side. Because what they do, and I think part of this is because they have been marinated in this themselves, we must not forget that over the last 60 years, all over Europe, right? Think about the last successful, big movies, whether it was Lord of the Rings or Avatar, right? It's always the story how artificial or industry or farming or agriculture, in a sense, it's actually bad, right? We are wresting something from nature, and things would be so much better if we just would leave them be. And this is precisely what the Dutch farmer movement says. They say, well, those farmers, they pollute the environment, they use fertilizers, they use machinery. They're like the orcs in Lord of the Rings, right? And those who fight against them are like the elves and those quasi-holy figures. And of course, this is not true. It should be exactly the opposite. As you correctly pointed out, it's a miracle that a country of the size of the Netherlands is one of the world's largest agricultural producers. Of course, this has an effect on the environment, just as mining has an effect on the environment, right? All of these things have an effect, but the question we have to ask, what is the alternative? I found the slogan that they used, no farmers, no food, was one of the most compelling ones. Is sure, you can give, all these farmlands back to nature, but how exactly are you going to find something to eat on your plate? And I think that argument was not made forcefully enough.
Julie, how do you react? Ralph's saying that there's a movement almost to take away the stuff of everyday life. The farmers, the cars, all the nuclear power, mining, all of these things going away. How do you react to that?
I mean, what he said is so succinct there. It's that, when you take away, especially the national identity of somewhere, so the farmers there, the miners here, when we had the coal miners, when we've seen what happened when you take that national identity of work away from people, they lose everything. Whole communities are still recovering from that loss that we've had, for example, with mining. The same is going to happen perhaps in the Netherlands, hopefully not with the way they're fighting back. But it's almost like we're basically going through the new technological revolution, aren't we? And under the guise of climate change. So they're being told, change this and that, make it more environmentally friendly, you're destroying the land. But actually, it's just more corporatism, and it's taking away the national identity, I think, of so many people around the world, especially in this case, the farmers.
It is interesting, isn't it, Stuart? As he says, that is what the Netherlands are known for. They're farmers, they're producers of food. And that's being taken away from them. It seems...
Well, it seems counterintuitive, actually. I mean, I came late to this, but your correspondent, Eva Varengbroek, yes, has brought this up on Twitter time and again. Yes. I've read it with great interest. So I'm late to the debate, but it seems counterintuitive and counterproductive if the Netherlands is one of the biggest producers of agricultural produce in the world, to actually somehow to put penalties on it.
Yes.
It seems stupid.
Ralph, is there optimism as you describe the political situation shifting in the Netherlands? With some proper traction in the representing the general population. Are there grounds for hope?
I mean, at the moment, unfortunately, I have to say no. All of Europe and parts of the US and parts of the United Kingdom, we are in the grip of a common psychosis, which is expressing itself primarily in we want to turn against everything that makes civilized life possible. And we are very bad. I say we because I assume we're on the same side of this, and we are very bad in communicating this. So either you want to have a modern civilization, but then you're going to need all the things that the left hates. You need modern agriculture. We cannot go back to a society where 98% of the population work as farmers. We need agriculture that is so productive that only 2% work as farmers, so that the other, 98% can become, OnlyFans account holders and influencers, but all these, or green politicians, for that matter. So if this is what you want to have, right, then you need all these underpinnings as well. It is. Again, I cannot stress this enough. It's a little bit like in the time machine where I have to Eloy and the Morlocks, right? If you want to live like the Eloy, you need all these quote unquote dark stuff, like, a steel industry, a fertilizer industry, a farming industry. You need the things. If we don't have them, like society, civilization will break down. And this is, I think, what all these movements, whether it's the pro-nuclear movement in Germany, whether it's the nuclear movement in the United Kingdom, the farmers movement in the Dutch, this is the argument they have to make. They are the pillars of civilization. If you undermine them, you undermine our civilization. And what that can lead to, that's then up to anybody's own fantasy. But I think this is the argument they have to make.
That's the note we'll end on, Ralph. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date. This is a preoccupation of this show here on GB News. So, Ralph Schoellhammer, I'll be coming back to you in the future to hear yet more as we hopefully see a turn of events in the farmers' favour.